All right, let's welcome in Adam Mosseri. Adam, what's up, man?
Hi, how you doing?
I'm hanging in there. I'm hanging in there.
Yeah.
We were just talking. The last time we were together seems like a lifetime ago, literally.
It was a whole other world.
It was a whole
other world.
It was about 2 weeks before the world essentially shut down in March. It was in February in San Francisco, and we ate at this unbelievable Sardinian place in Noy Valley in San Francisco called La Chicha, and it's literally, I still haven't stopped thinking about that meal.
It's amazing.
I actually said to Tommy today, I was like, dude, we could potentially not have Adam on the podcast for leadership. We could have him on as just like a food guest.
Just to talk about Italian food for an hour.
Oh my God. I mean, that's like the only thing I can do during the pandemic that's outside of work and kids is try and find the best food I can around that does takeout or outdoor dining.
How are they doing though? So they just reopened up?
Yeah, they're doing well. They were closed for a while. I was emailing Lorella. So Lorella and Massimiliano are the owners. So I was emailing me like, "What are you doing? You got to do takeout." They like don't usually do takeout. I was like, "This is gonna be a while, so you gotta figure some stuff out." It took them a little while. They did a little bit of like a GoFundMe or something. I gave them some money, and then they ended up getting a decent amount of money from a few other people too. And then they ended up finally doing takeout. So takeout for a while. And more recently, they opened up their back patio for outdoor dining. So my wife and I had a date night there last week. So it's very top of mind for me as well.
I had to go on their menu earlier because I wanted to relive the sea urchin pasta and the spaghetti with botarga. Like those two, the spaghetti is next level.
It came out. I haven't had it in like almost a year, basically since I saw you. It came out last week and I ate it I just eat obnoxiously quickly. It's a bad habit. I can't help myself. So it was gone in about 90 seconds. And Massimiliano, the chef, came out to like, to say like, "Thanks for coming. It's good to see you. How have you been?" And it was just gone. He's like, "Do you want me to make you another one?" I was like, No, I'm good. I'm good. I'm embarrassed right now, but I'm good. So, but yeah, that is the dish of all dishes there. Simple, but amazing.
When I had that meal last year, I was hesitant to tell people in the NBA world about that restaurant. Because I'm like, I kind of want, and I know we're talking about the podcast, of course, but this is, pre-pandemic. I'm like, I kind of want this place to remain my little secret.
You literally said that. He said that when we left the restaurant. He said, "Don't tell anybody."
I don't want you to tell anybody. I love these guys, but if it blows up, it'll be tough. Now it's a pandemic. I just want to make sure that they, not only survive but thrive. So we'll send them all the love we can. But if it wasn't for the pandemic, I would have definitely shut this conversation down like 3 minutes ago.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, you are currently the head of Instagram, but we wanted to provide the listener with some background on you and how you sort of got to that position.
Sure.
And you went to NYU. You were, living in a 1-bedroom apartment with a bunch of roommates, designing websites. You go from that. You end up at Facebook as one of the early employees, and now you're the head of Instagram. So can you kind of just chart your career path and sort of where you made the right decisions and how you ended up as the head of Instagram?
Yeah, no, I mean, sure. It was a fair amount of luck and advantage, but also a fair amount of work. I had a really circuitous path. So I was essentially in college, I started a design firm to pay for rent and beer money and that kind of thing. And so I ended up, by the time I graduated, with a small design firm. So I did that. I moved out west because I thought that would be interesting. I don't know. I wasn't really thinking ahead. I just wanted to see what California was like. And I had a bunch of friends who worked in tech and who worked at, Facebook, and they were trying to recruit me. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would I want to work at Facebook? Like, I'm my own boss. It seems way better than your thing. But about a year later, I built an app for Facebook, or maybe a couple years later. And that was much more fun than working for clients. And So I just made a bunch of jumps. I jumped into Facebook as a designer. I jumped into what we call product management or PM. I ended up running newsfeed. I ended up on Instagram. But what really I think helped me was every couple of years, just shaking things up, trying something new, putting myself in a position where I was really getting stretched, and then just trying to like dig myself out of that hole for a couple of years. And so then I ended up in this role as of maybe 2.5 years ago now. So still kind of a wild ride.
Adam, what year did you get to Facebook?
I applied in June of 2007, but I got hired in July of 2008. It took me, I knocked on the door. I called them every month or two for a year, just trying to I didn't even get an interview. I was just trying to get an interview. I was like, if I could just talk to these people, I can just demonstrate that I'm competent. I know what I'm doing, but it took a while. It took a year.
What was it about Facebook back then that made you want to work for them so bad? Because, I'm trying to think. I graduated in 2006. Facebook to me was very much like a college thing where you tried to get hot girls to, follow you basically. And
yeah.
I was on it.
Completely different than Instagram today. It's not
very different than Instagram. But like I was on there very briefly at the time. But what did you see in Facebook that made you want to work there?
I mean, I didn't have the best reasons. I remember, so I thought that I liked using the product a lot. I use it to keep in touch with friends. I mean, living on the West Coast, being from the East Coast, having family all around the world, just really loved using it. And I had this sort of notion that they cared about design. I was a designer at the time. And I had more and more friends that started working there, right? My wife and I started dating, and then in 2006, and she joined Facebook in 2007, and I joined in 2008. And so between her and some other friends, a guy named Nick, another guy named Clay, a woman named Allie, they were just like, they said it would look like fun. And so I was like, to work at a place where I'm building something that I like using with people that I admire, but also just get along with, seemed like it would be just a good thing to do. When I quit my job, I told my boss I was going to go to Facebook. I told him why. And he said, you should definitely go to Facebook, but for none of the reasons why you're saying. He said, you should go for 2 reasons. One is the people you'll meet there will serve you for your entire career. This is a guy, his name was Brian Phillips. He actually used to work at PayPal. The whole PayPal mafia is a whole thing. All those PayPal, ex-PayPal people all help each other out, invest together, build companies together, et cetera. And then he told me also, it's like, look, it just might be an insanely successful company. He said it might have a chance of being $100 billion company one day, because at that point it was like a $10 billion company or something. And I was like, none of those things resonate, but I'm still going to go. And I went, but he was right. I mean, like in more than the company getting big, like the people that I've met and got a chance to work with, and work for, manage, et cetera, over the years have been one of the 2 most important motivators for me the whole time there.
What point in your run did you start to like look around and say like, okay, this is like, forget the actual money for a second, but more just the scale of what the company has become? Like this is becoming a big deal.
So I think there's a couple different things. When I joined, one of the big topics was the Arab Spring. And a lot of that kind of got facilitated on Facebook because we were really big in the Middle East at the time. And this was when populism was associated more with, democracy and bringing democracy to parts of the world that didn't historically have it. So we had this notion even when I joined that it was a big deal and there was a lot of potential for change. That grew slowly over time. I think when we saw like a sort of kink in the curve, so to speak, when things got much more intense was in the wake of the US 2016 presidential election. And I think there's been a lot of criticism since then. Some I agree with, some I disagree with. But I think the heart of it, or the most important thing for me, is that we were working in the space of sort of safety and integrity, but we weren't taking it as seriously or investing in it as much as we should have. And when you start out, like it's not usually what you're thinking about when you're trying to build something from scratch. When I joined, we were literally trying to catch up with MySpace. MySpace was the bigger, more successful social media platform, and like that was our like goal, was just to catch up with them. So it makes sense that at that point you're not really thinking about, how what you're building might be abused or misused. But once we passed them, and somewhere between then and 2016, we should have pivoted more and focused more on the potential for abuse. And I was managing newsfeed in 2016, so I was on point for fake news as a problem. Especially in the wake of the election, and so that was the massive wake up call, the massive moment where we had to internalize our responsibility and the scale of everything, and try to make sure that we embrace that responsibility as best we could. And we've been playing catch up ever since.
If you could go back, let's say, to 2015, when Trump announces he's running? This is not an anti-Trump thing. This is an anti-fake news thing. But
Sure.
and misinformation and disinformation and whatnot. But if you could go back, because this is really when this started to really take off. If you could go back, what would you change? And what lessons did you learn from that you're implementing now in terms of the way you manage people and the way you manage products?
Yeah, I mean, the bigger thing is just to make sure that we're looking for ways to shed light on our blind spots. What are the problems that we should understand and get ahead of? The specific thing around the election was we were focused on sort of hackers, and what we should have been focused on isn't actually even fake news, that we should have done more there. It's more the sort of IRA, foreign interference, election integrity type work. We were focused more on an old form of election interference, not on people pretending to be Americans, sowing discord and hate between people on our platform. That was the big blind spot of ours. But in general, the specifics aside, like that's the thing you have to always be doing. It's trying to understand what is that you do not know that you should know about, and then going and figuring out ways to systematically light those up.
I want to ask you a general question about Silicon Valley.
Yeah, it's a weird place.
It ties into sort of a follow-up question just about Facebook, because I would probably be described as a coastal elite at this point in my life. I went to Duke. I live in New York City. I'm a liberal. Like, I am, by all accounts, a coastal elite. And I have not spent a ton of time in Silicon Valley other than literally a day with Sam Hinkie. It was the only time I've been out there. But I think for a lot of America, there's a really negative attitude towards Silicon Valley. And we're going to get into later just about the divisiveness of certain social media apps. But in general, I would assume you seem like a very reasonable human being. I would assume there are some good things about Silicon Valley. But in your opinion, where sort of has it gone astray? Whether in terms of culture or the disconnect from, let's call it, normal American existence.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad. I think the good is, there's a lot of optimism about the future. There's a lot of, and I think that's healthy and a good thing. And by the way, a particularly American thing. I think there's been a lot of amazing innovation that's come out of this small part of California over the last, half century, basically. A lot of what we do, it goes back to things as far back as Xerox PARC and, the mouse, and like how we can use a computer or video chat, or all these things are based on, in large part, a lot of innovations that happen here, which is amazing. I think having some optimism about the future is important to create some space for creativity, for people to be generative and to invent new and interesting things that create value in people's lives, and so, you end up taking that for granted eventually. That's just how it works. Like there's, it's like all of a sudden there's internet in a plane and you're like, yeah, this is awesome. And 10 minutes later, you're like, why is it slow? And you're pissed. But that's okay. That's human nature. But so much of how we communicate, how we do commerce, how we entertain, has been influenced in a positive way by this small part of the world. So I think that's great. I think on the downside, though, it's too insular. I think that it's not particularly diverse. It's very homogenous. And I don't think in general, if I can be so bold to suggest it, we've been sufficient, we have been good enough at just reaching out and understanding what it's like to be somebody else, somewhere else. Certainly the average American, we're not, but also just, the average person, right? Like at Instagram, we've got, over 1 billion users, and the vast majority of them aren't in the US. The vast majority of them don't even speak English. And so how do we try and proactively burst our bubbles, spend time with other people, immerse ourselves in other cultures, understand other needs, is something I don't think we've done well enough. And then when you're too insular, you end up having blind spots, like I talked about before. You end up with your own jargon, your own like language that just makes you sound like an idiot, really, to somebody outside. I'm constantly trying to like not use acronyms, not say words like ecosystem, or even when I say create value for people, the average person is like, what the hell does that mean? Like my job when I joined Facebook was a product designer, is what we called it. A product to the average American is like a shoe. It's not a website. And so when you end up being too insular, I just think you lose perspective. And I think then you make less good decisions, you make more mistakes. And I think, and you become just, I don't want to curse, so maybe for lack of a more eloquent term, off-putting to everybody else. And you end up with a show like Silicon Valley on HBO.
Adam, this is a little broad, but you've managed a lot of employees, both at Facebook and obviously at Instagram now. When you're talking to your employees, when you're hiring people, when you're doing all of that sort of process, you guys at both companies, you have a tremendous amount of power. And obviously we just talked about the political ramifications, but like think about every industry from entertainment to food to shopping that is now, if they don't implement your platform, for the most part, they're screwed. They're crazy to not do it. And so it's a thing that just exists, and it's like either they can say it directly or it can be implied, but we all sort of know it. I mean, we know it with when we started this podcast company, it's like we couldn't not go on Instagram. JJ used to not do social media. That wasn't an option once we were like, we actually have to do this for real.
Your followers have gone up though. I've been watching.
But so, and we'll get to JJ after this, but I guess my question is like, how do you train the people who you work with and work for you to not like abuse that power? Because we see that kind of thing happening at every kind of job. When you have too much authority, you can exercise it in the wrong way.
So most of the people, at least in my experience, both at Facebook and Instagram, are actually very idealistic isn't the right word, but like mission driven. They're really excited about the potential to, have impact in the world, but it's not direct, right? Because what we do isn't direct, it's very indirect. We build tools and then people use them and do all sorts of interesting and creative things. And that's not to say that we don't have power. We have a lot of power. We have a lot of responsibility. We need to take that seriously. But it's not like, it's not like another industry. It's not like being an editor of a newspaper or a writer. We fund some small content as a percentage, but as a percentage of the overall ecosystem, it's like very, very tiny, right? Like we build tools, people use those tools. We try to understand their needs and then iterate and get better at them over time. And so for most people, it's about trying to make sure that they have perspective as opposed to just, being worried about abusing power. So it's about, all right, well, how do you make sure you understand people's needs? How do you make sure people understand the context or the macro shifts that are happening in the world, right? There's the growth of video, there's the shift to mobile, there's the movement of commerce from offline to online, there's the shift in power from institutions to individuals across almost all industries right now, which, this is where like the creators come in and how can we do for them? So I am just constantly trying to provide my people with information. So I do, a Q&A every Friday internally with the team. I write a top of mind letter every week. I don't even know how many people it goes out to now, probably a couple thousand. I am available for a whole bunch. It's nothing but channels. There's like too many apps on my phone and on my computer now that get hit up. But I think it's about providing them context and information and hiring really good people. and then holding them accountable if they ever do anything wrong or mess up or underperform, more than any specific sort of concern around abuse. If it ever comes up around like abuse of power, it's not usually that an individual can do something really problematic, because there's lots of checks and balances built in. You can't just go and, be like, you know what, I don't like JJ, I'm just gonna like shut down his account. There's like no good way to do that. But I do think that often people, they're passionate, they're trying to affect change in the world, they're trying to affect positive change, but they have their own biases, they have their own perspectives, and it's important when they push for how to design systems that they're cognizant that there are other types of opinions. So I do find myself often being like, hey, that like what you're thinking about is great, but it's a little bit of a narrow perspective. Does that make sense in Nicaragua? Does that make sense if you are a struggling musician? Does that make sense if you're a small business? And to try to make sure that they, again, have more perspective.
One of the inherent things about technology and products that are driven by technology is that they're constantly evolving. So you can create a product and you can have an intention of how people are going to use it, but then people are going to use it in a way that maybe you didn't intend it. And we've mentioned the word blind spots a couple times. How much of your time and focus on a day-to-day basis is given to bad actors on Instagram?
It's a good question. It's changed over time. So when I first joined Instagram, it was a lot because our teams that worked on safety and integrity were just, I think, not only too small, but also not doing the most important things. And so I got super involved there. So I told everyone when I joined, I was going to be a sponge, because I was like this Facebook guy coming over to the Instagram team, and they were like, who's this dude? And I was like, look, I'm going to meet as many people as I can. I'm going to get as much context as I can. I'm not going to push for any change for at least a couple months. And the one place where I broke that promise was sort of safety and integrity work, what we call well-being work internally. And it was because when I got into the details, this was like the midterm elections were coming up in the US, and we just weren't where we needed to be. And so I got really heavily involved. Over time, I managed to pull in really strong talent to manage those teams directly. People who are smarter than me, deeper than me in the space, and who can be just completely dedicated to the cause. And as that has happened, I pulled back and given them space. I'm a firm believer that you should hire the best possible people you can. You should. A common mistake is people get threatened by hiring better people than them, but I think that's just a mistake. And then you should make sure you agree with them about what success looks like, possibly about what the best path is to get there. And then you should try to get the hell out of their way. You got to give them feedback. It's not like you just let them run free. But I do think that often, particularly newer managers and leaders, bias too much towards micromanaging their people as opposed to empowering them. And so I think you find the best talent you can, you agree on sort of like the rough structure or the rough definition of the qualitative description of what success looks like. And then you just try to amplify what they're doing as opposed to getting too in their way. So that's my bias.
Whenever I have to join a new team, I'm always cognizant of the fact that if I walk into a locker room or walk on the court with a new group of people, I can't immediately start dictating. The better approach for me has always been to listen, to get to know people, to figure out where my strengths can amplify other people, right? I would imagine when you took over as the head of Instagram, when you went to Instagram, it was you're coming off the two founders leaving. And I assume you were very cognizant of that, but I'd also assume it was a very challenging situation to walk into. What were some of those challenges?
Yeah, it was a mess. I do want to ask you about how much the coach leads versus the players lead in your world too at some point, but I'll answer this question first. Look, so I joined Instagram in March of 18 as the head of product. So a big reason why I joined is because I wanted to work with Mike and Kevin, the founders, who I just have been an admirer of for a while. I was surprised they wanted me to join because I had been a little bit of a pain in their ass the year before. They were trying to do certain things in the Facebook app that I didn't think were, I don't know. I just didn't think they were well designed probably at the time. And so I was just excited that they were even interested in me because I've been an admirer of them, but I've been a little bit sort of difficult with them the prior year. And so I joined in March. Part of it was like, we just had our second kid. I had just been working on fake news for a couple of years. I wanted a little bit more work-life balance. It was a big job, but it wasn't as crazy as my previous job. 6 months later, they left. And so I was excited to get the job, but I was bummed that they were leaving because part of the reason why I took the job I had before was to work with them. But it was a mess because it was abrupt and we didn't really have a transition plan. And so I was trying to, keep everyone stable. I was trying to like make sure they talked to the team, make sure that Mark and Chris, my boss at the time, had at least a plan for how to pick a successor. I was trying to like just trying to like connect the dots and keep the train on the tracks. And then, I interviewed, I got the job, and then it was all about just managing the morale of the team. I have a large team, a lot of young people, a lot of millennials, a lot of emotions, a lot of passion, a lot of talent. But how do I make sure that I help them wrestle with what this means to lose the founders? What does it mean for Instagram's role within the broader Facebook company? How do I keep them motivated? So the first year was really a lot of damage control, hiring my leadership team because we had lost a bunch of leaders as well, and kind of getting through that transition. And it was tough. I mean, I don't want to complain. It's a great job, but about 2 months in, I was like, this was a horrible mistake. But it got a lot better about half a year in. So since then, I've been much happier.
I have a question, Adam, but do you want to ask JJ your thing first?
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know how this works in your world, but for me, leadership is in part, it's about hiring the right people. It's about, having a broad perspective. It's about, figuring out how to get the most out of your people. How much of that happens from the coach versus like the vet versus like the star player? And should you have one of those sort of behemoths?
Well, it's a great question, actually. And it's different on every team. And it's even different year to year. So you can have the same group of guys, but somehow organically leadership roles can change. I would say a coach inherently is going to be a leader, right? He's going to speak at every press conference. He's going to dictate who plays. He's going to dictate a lot of the in-game adjustments and play calling and whatnot. But ultimately, up to me, a coach is someone, as you just mentioned, is someone who can put the talent in a position to succeed, right? That's ultimately what a coach's job is. I think a lot of the day-to-day leadership about who drives a culture, that's more player-based. And with anywhere from 13 to 15 guys on a roster, if you have 2 or 3 of those so-called culture drivers, I think I'm borrowing this from Pop, actually, who has used that phrase before. But if you have 2 or 3 of those guys, then that can sort of alleviate any concerns about the 13th or 14th guy maybe not being in line with everybody else. So it's not always your best players. I mean, that's the weird thing about leadership in the NBA is oftentimes the best players aren't necessarily the leaders. There's obviously exceptions to that rule. We just played Damian Lillard the other night. He's one of the 5 best, in my opinion, players in the NBA. He's probably one of the best leaders in the NBA. But that's, I think that's rarer, if that makes sense. Unhappy with your smile? You don't have to be. Thousands of people have used Candid, the clear, comfortable, removable, and practically invisible aligners to help straighten their teeth. And now they love their smile. Just like Sharon H. from Pittsburgh. She says, I wore braces as a teenager. Flash forward 30 years, I had crowding on the bottom, and one of my teeth actually stuck out. That's when I made the decision to move forward with Candid, and finally got my confidence back. And Candid is here to help straighten your teeth so you can fall in love with your smile too. Your treatment is prescribed and closely monitored remotely by a licensed orthodontist who's an expert in tooth movement. You'll have the same quality of care you'd get from an in-office orthodontist from the comfort and convenience of your own home.
And while other companies use general dentists, Candid only works with orthodontists. With Candid, the same orthodontist who created your plan is with you from start to finish, so you never have to wonder how you're doing.
The average Candid treatment is just 6 months, so you'll start seeing results way before then, and it costs thousands less than traditional braces. So become your best you. Start straightening your teeth today. Right now, you can save $75 on Candid Starter Pack. That's $75. Go to candidco.com/JJ and use code JJ. That's candidco.com/JJ, code JJ. Take advantage of this limited time offer to save $75 on your starter kit. Don't forget, candidco.com/JJ, code JJ. Okay, Hoops fans, the tournament is finally here. The brackets have been set and the teams are ready to hit the court. And DraftKings, the leader in one-day fantasy, is celebrating with their largest free college basketball survivor pool ever. How large? $1 million in total prizes up for grabs.
Wow. And if that's not enough, check this out. When you enter the free DraftKings $1 million survivor pool, you could get a shot at winning $10,000 for every upset through the first 2 rounds of the tournament. It's easy to play. Just pick one team per day. If they win, you survive and advance to the next round. Last person standing is the winner. Remember, you can only pick a team once for the entire tournament, so make sure to choose wisely.
And remember, DraftKings is a safe and secure app. You can deposit and withdraw your funds at your convenience. So get in on all of this week's action. Download the DraftKings app now. Enter code JJ to during sign up and enter the free $1 million survivor pool. Again, that is code JJ to enter into DraftKings free $1 million survivor pool. Eligibility restrictions and terms and conditions apply. See DraftKings.com for details.
Adam, I have an innovation question for you. You know, JJ and I were talking before you got on about just your Instagram's just sort of overall approval rating kind of broadly on a macro level. We're not just saying this because you're on or because you're our friend or whatever, but like it feels like compared to the other platforms, it just has a much higher overall approval rating. You know, people seem to like it. There are far fewer complaints. It just is a thing that it's just in a good place comparatively to everything else. So when you're thinking about, you know, these additions and these changes, sometimes like drastic changes to the platform, I know, you know, we've talked about, and there's been some stuff about like getting rid of likes potentially and things like that are real, you know, shifts to how people have their day-to-day existence. What is your, like, do you have second thoughts? Like, what's your overall kind of sense of like, I don't want to rock the boat when there's something that people really like?
Yeah, I bias a little more in the other direction, but I definitely worry about it. I know that when we change things on people, it pisses people off because, you know, you got used to the way something worked and all of a sudden it changed one day. You weren't asked, you didn't approve it, and that can just be annoying. But I really think that the biggest risk for us isn't competition, though competition is definitely a risk. It's that the world changes because the world is changing faster and faster, and what you do becomes irrelevant. And if you don't evolve, you know, you're just gonna slowly fade into the background. You know, and if you think about Instagram when it first started, it was just a feed of square, you know, photos, and we didn't have DMs, we didn't have stories, you know, we didn't have any of that. And now most of what people do on Instagram, or at least most of the growth, has come from these other areas like messaging and stories. So I try to remember that. I also am always trying to compensate for the bias of my teams. My teams are naturally going to be often more interested in like not rocking the boat and making sure what's working continues to work. But if we're not taking big swings, I'm pretty confident that we'll eventually really regret it. And so I kind of pushed in the other direction. Last year, we took a lot of swings. We made a lot of new changes. We added reels, we added a shopping tab, you know, we've done sort of recommendations in the feed, et cetera. So this year has got to be about delivering on those commitments and about cleaning up the app a little bit. It's gotten too complicated. I think we've gotten too far away from simplicity and craft, which are two of the things we try to hold dear in how we approach all that we do. But I think that's also healthy. It's sort of an ebb and flow where you do some more new stuff, then you clean some stuff up and you deliver, and then you go back and forth. I think that's good too. But it's a constant balancing act, right? Because we certainly would be less likely to bother people if we didn't change things. But I think that that'll probably be the death of us over the long run. In terms of like how people feel about it, though, one, it varies a lot by country. So there's actually a lot of countries where Twitter is viewed more positively, or Facebook is used more positively, or et cetera. But in general, I think Instagram has a more positive charge or sort of vibe, for lack of a better word. And I think a big part of that is that we don't have links, so we don't get a bunch of news. News is important, but it's somewhat critical and has sort of some negative energy. We don't have what we call reshares on Facebook. So the ability to just share a post and then share it and then share it and share it, which by the way is one of the most requested features, but that's how you end up with a lot of viral content. And some of that's really fun and some of that's really negative. And we're sort of predominantly, images. So it's people essentially documenting their lives, telling their stories through photos. And so as a result, I think it just ends up with more of a positive charge. Twitter, which by the way, I'm a big fan of, is sort of the other end of the spectrum. It's basically designed for debate. And that debate's super important. So this is not shade being thrown Twitter's way, but it's more negative. So my Twitter is the darkest place I go to on a regular basis because I follow all of our deepest, darkest critics. So that's my own. That's on me, not on them. Facebook's kind of somewhere in the middle. And I think what happened is we all made different decisions about some of these fundamentals early on. And over time, that meant that the experience has evolved into very different directions from a sort of, an energy or an emotional standpoint.
I want to talk about likes. So you guys have experimented with removing likes from public view. I think recently, maybe 2 weeks ago, some users accidentally lost the feature to see likes, and they were outraged.
Yeah, it's not a good look when we do it by mistake.
Yeah. But this and you've talked about this publicly a bunch, but this sort of goes in line with some of the negative repercussions of social media, and whether it's a teenager worrying about not having enough likes on a post, or maybe bullying. But how cognizant are you of that? In terms of growth, because likes are so important for any user, but also I wanted to ask specifically about how much that factors into the way you view social media because you have kids. Because I want to get into my sort of detachment from social media at times and how I feel about it with my own kids, but I wanted to sort of get your perspective on that.
Yeah, so the idea was and is to depressurize Instagram a little bit by hiding the like counts. So if you want to go count them up, enjoy, Godspeed. But the idea was to hopefully make it so that people could spend a little bit more time and energy focused on connecting with people or things that they love, and a little bit less on the sort of more competition type of vibe that you get from trying to compare like counts. It wasn't about mental health. It wasn't about medical well-being. It was sort of more of sort of a broader, kind of lighter weight idea than that. It's just polarizing. It just turns out some people really like it and some people really don't like it. We should have wrapped this up by either shipping it or not shipping it a while ago, but the team that was working on this, we ended up having to pivot to work on a lot of the racial justice work last year in the wake of all the unrest around racial inequality, particularly here in the US. And so now we've sort of picked it back up. And you can see that the new team, by mistake, launched it to a bunch of people a couple weeks ago, which, you pick up something new, it's going to happen. So I try to give them a break, but it's not a good look. So I'm not going to make that mistake twice. I think where we're going to end up, what we will see is we'll probably look for a way to bring the experience to people who want it and not to those who don't. And ultimately, I feel like people are, people can make their own decisions and they should be able to shape the experience more than they currently can. And this would be an interesting way to do that. So that's what we're exploring right now. And I hope it does. I hope people like it, but it's not about engagement. It's not about people using the service more, or us making more money. And it's not about mental health. We have no evidence that it actually helps people, in some sort of medical way. So it's more about people's sense or sentiment about Instagram. I think it's valuable for us to do things that make people feel like they've got more control over the experience and make people feel better about the time that they spend on the platform. That has to be good for us, in my belief, over the long run, even if it's not good for revenue or, time spent or something like that in the short term. And so I want to make sure we get that balance right. So that's why we do this type of work. So we'll see where we net out. My kids are too young. I think your kids are too young to use Instagram too.
Oh yeah.
But I definitely want to make sure that I feel good about the experience that we've built. I want to make sure that when our kids are turn 13, that I'm like, yeah, absolutely, get on there. This is how to get on there, and here's how to do it, and here's how to be safe, and here's how to be thoughtful. And I think that we're close, but there's more that we can do there.
Are you ever able to detach from social media?
Yeah, not as much as I'd like. I'm getting better. I'm not able to detach from much. I kind of like, I'm like one of those people who's usually thinking about work, or something I need to get done in life. So, but my life is basically this garage and my kids. Pandemic world, it's gotten real small, real fast. But yeah, I try to get off of it. But for me, social media is work in a lot of ways, like especially being on Twitter.
Well, I know it's a hard question for me to ask and a hard question for you to answer because you don't want people to detach from social media.
No,
I mean it's inherently not good for business, I would assume.
But again, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that if people are spending time on Instagram because they feel like they have to, not because they want to, or if they spend time and they don't feel good about the time they spent, that has to be bad for us and our business over the long run. It means when we get criticized, it'll stick more. It means that people will eventually be excited to jump ship when the next thing inevitably comes. It means that they'll lose trust in us. And we're an advertising business, so it's built on trust in a lot of ways. So I think that, yes, that is absolutely a risk that all the social media apps have, that they could fall into this sort of, I don't know, myopic way of thinking, or this sort of like treadmill just has to go faster and faster and faster. But I like the idea of us giving space. I like the idea, like right now at the end of the feed, we say, hey, you're all caught up. Here's some more stuff, but you can also go for a walk if you want. Like, I really like the idea of giving people a way to sort of take a break, particularly young people, because you go through a breakup, you switch schools or whatever, you're in a moment of sort of vulnerability. It would be great to just kind of put your account on ice for a couple of days and let whatever's going on pass, and then be able to turn it back on. That's not going to be good for dollars made on a given day, but I think that's got to be good for people and good for us over the long run too. So I try to make sure we think long term, not just how much people are using Instagram today or tomorrow.
Tommy knows this. I had a couple incidences where I had to put it on ice for longer than a couple days.
Longer than a couple days is right.
Would you get in the comments? What happened?
Oh, no.
I will say this. You got back on Instagram before anything else. And you got back on Instagram, not to betray anything, you got back on significantly before it was public that you were back on. Because you weren't doing it for you're just doing it to be on it and to follow people.
I have to say, my enjoyment with Instagram is levels above any other social media app that I've ever used. And so I got back on partially because little humble brag, but there was going to be an architectural digest feature on our apartment, and the writer was like,
big deal.
We really want to tag you. We really want to tag you. Can you have an account? I'm like, all right, I'll create an account. But okay. I said, I actually at that time I was like, all right, I can use this in a safe way. It had been, I don't know what it had been, a year and a half since I'd been on Instagram, so I felt like I could.
Where he screwed up, Adam, and we've talked to you about this before, is he deleted everything. So rather than just freezing everything and not going on it for 2 years, he had whatever 300,000, 400,000 followers, whatever it was, and just was like, boom, they're all gone. And so everything, and ironically, you started all of this. This is crazy to think about. you did your first post like this time last year. It was during the pandemic. It was because when we did a podcast with Jimmy Butler, and it was the last podcast we did pre-pandemic. And because when I made him get back on Twitter, and I ran the account for like the first like 3 days, and I posted the photo of us and Jimmy. Actually, now he's back in, everybody. So that was I posted one tweet.
I should actually interject here because you actually ran the Twitter account for like a month. and then I was like, man, I don't know this guy. It's like, I don't know. He's gonna post something that I'm like. Then you started using these phrases that I definitely don't use.
I was gonna like the wrong thing. And
I was like, this guy sounds like a 20-year-old. I'm not. It was gonna
spiral. It was gonna spiral.
That's smart. If he wants you to be on it, all he's gonna do is get on there and do a mediocre job. Get out of the way. Let me back into my thing.
Hey, I was doing but the engagement was good. It was just I don't know, from a PR standpoint, we were.
This is a random question for both of you. Other than like, I'm very curious about this actually. Other than the people you know, your friends, your coworkers, maybe peers or whatever, if someone were to pick up your IG feed and scroll through it, what are the 2 or 3 themes that they would be like, oh, this person's into whatever?
Yeah, it's bad. It's bad, especially your Explorer. Your Explorer is real telling. Yes. Like you pull that.
That's the algorithm.
You gotta because it's like not people you followed. It's like what you do, what do you click on, what do you interact with, and so you gotta be pretty brave to show someone your Explorer.
Yeah.
I'll tell you.
Yeah, I want to hear yours.
I got a lot of surfing videos and snowboarding videos, men's fashion and watches, and food are kind of the biggest ones. Oh, also dance videos. I've gotten really into like some of the more fun dance videos and comedians, but it's kind of boring.
Are you saying, JJ, on your Explorer, or are you saying if someone looks at your photos?
Both. It could be both. I mean, obviously, yeah, I love it.
I will say this. I think that there's a...
By the way, Tommy, I just asked a question directly to Tommy, and he's not going to answer the question. He's not
going to answer every time. I'm going to answer it right now. I think that... I think
pick up your phone, Tommy.
I think my issue with Instagram in general is most of the time when I post a post, it is some sort of like cool thing, or it's like, oh, this is like some career achievement, or this is like some cool photo or whatever it is. And so it makes my life seem like I'm doing that stuff all the time. In reality, like it's not like I definitely do it, but it's every couple weeks, it's every month. And so it's not, I don't post enough like normal shit. You know what I mean? Like I don't post stuff where it's like, oh, I just did this today. In part because I think people would be bored by it. But it does project. I can understand why people would think this about me or other people who do this. It projects a level of like, oh, you've curated this to make it seem like a certain way or whatever it is, and that can be like.
But that's what stories are for, right? Like, look, we all talk differently and show a different side of ourselves depending on the context. There's certain things I'll say here that and I'll speak differently when I go back into the house and talk to my wife later tonight because we're being recorded. And this is going to be on the internet. And that's reasonable. And so like what we find on Instagram is what people share in the feed into their profile, right? Because that's around forever. It's like the highlights. That's the stuff that you're proud of, right? So it's, maybe it's you doing some baller stuff. For me, it's like, if I wasn't a public like account, it would be like kid stuff mostly. I'm proud of my kids. And stories, it's more like a little bit more what happened today kind of thing, and then in DMs is where you can be real because it's totally private. And so you have that sort of, we want to build a bunch of different experiences to meet people's different needs. Sometimes people really want to shout from the top of a building to everyone they know that something happened. Sometimes they just want to share what's going on in the day for only those who are interested. And sometimes they want to just message you something specific and private because it's just YouTube. So we try to embrace that sort of range.
Tommy, still waiting on your answer to the question.
I just answered first of all, Adam, I just answered the question. And by the way, did you know he always does this to me? Because you're listening to the show. He didn't answer himself. He just throws it on to me and then claims that I don't answer.
It's a very... Look, like I said at the beginning, sharing your Explorer is like a real personal thing. It's not something you normally would do when you're being recorded.
I feel like I hit a very touchy subject with Tommy tonight. I'll share mine. I mean, if I got nothing to hide. It's golf, some form of architectural design, and food. And I'll throw wine in there. Food, wine, whatever. Same thing. Those are the three things.
Yeah.
Easy breezy.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
What do you think your teammates' relationship with Instagram is? Not even your specific teammates on the Pelicans, but like we've talked about this, and JJ got in trouble once on the show, Adam, without saying any names because he didn't say any names, and it wasn't about anyone in particular, but about like the fit pics and how everybody cares about, you know, the photos of walking into the tunnel and stuff like that. Like, it feels like the only social media platform that guys in the league actually care about is IG. To me.
Oh, to Adam's point though, I think Instagram is more versatile than some of the other apps because you can use it however you want to use it. So for me, you know, I can follow my interests. I mean, other than like DMing some friends like Zaire golf memes, I don't really use DMs a lot, you know. That's not something I use. I don't post a ton on my feed. I enjoy stories. I enjoy seeing what Tommy's doing when I see the green circle around his thing. I know it's close friends.
He DMs me. If there's ever a restaurant, no matter where he is in the world, if there's a restaurant that I go to, there's a place in LA, Baldy, that is an Italian restaurant that's really good. If I go there, or I go get sidecar donuts or something like that, he'll just DM me, like he'll curse me out basically in the DM just because he's not having it. So the idea that I'm like, basically he doesn't want me to enjoy anything if he's not able to have it himself, which
totally reasonable. Totally reasonable.
We've gotten off track here, but I just want to say one thing about when Tommy posts those particular restaurants. There's no way in the back of his mind he's not thinking, I'm doing this to piss JJ off. Like that.
Well, sometimes I'll tag you. I'll do the sidecar. Sidecar. There's a place,
tags me.
There's a place, Sidecar Donuts in LA. The next time that you're there, which is the
My
best
brother
donuts.
lives in LA. I gotta go down. I want to go down sometime.
Congrats to him, by the way.
Oh my God.
Adam's brother is killing the game. Can you explain it to the audience?
Yeah. So my brother is. His name's Emil. He's a musician. He's been in a band forever, and he's a film scorer. He kind of got into film scoring over the last couple of years. And he did a movie called Last Black Man in San Francisco in 2019, and last year he did two movies, Kajillionaire and a movie called Minari. And Minari was about a lot of the buzz around the Oscars. And so the Oscars get announced, the nominees, this past Monday, 5:30 a.m. Pacific time. And I didn't want to talk to him because I know he was all nervous, so I kind of left him alone a couple of days before, whatever. But I was like, I set an alarm. I got up at 1:30, 3:30, 4:30, 5:30 all night long. I've been a mess since then. I'm too old to skip a night of sleep apparently and be okay 2 days later. So at 5:30 a.m. I'm just like on there like refreshing his phone to see what happened, and he got nominated. I am now Emil's brother, which I am pretty excited about because he's only got into the game like 2-3 years ago. So it's a big deal in the Mosseri household.
He did an amazing job. The movie's amazing, and he also did an amazing job on Last Black Man at San Francisco, and probably got robbed for that. Like, probably should have gotten nominated.
I mean, who knows? Whatever. I'm just psyched. I'm just pumped. I'm like a proud older brother. So you know, I'm biased. So I probably shouldn't talk about it anymore. But I think he's amazing.
Adam, before we let you go, we do like to ask our guests in the leadership series. Any advice, any leadership advice, any particular characteristics of leadership that have stood out to you both in your life and in your career?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think I'll try to keep it simple. I think for anybody, leaders or otherwise, I think one of the most important things is to be really honest with yourself about what matters to you most, and then make sure you shape your time to align with those aspirations. I think that it's hard to know the answer to that question, though. It's not going to just occur to you in the shower if you're most people. 1 out of 10 people in my experience really know what they want in 10 years or in 5 years or even in 2 years. So you got to do the work to answer that question. And that's hard work usually. But you got to be honest, because maybe it's the impact you have in the world. Maybe it's who you work with. Maybe it's how much money you make. Maybe it's recognition. Maybe it's what you learn. Whatever it is, you got to be honest with yourself. And then you got to align your time and shape your work to get you closer to whatever that is. And I just think that's the most important thing. And most people get swept up in the demands of the day or the week or whatever it is, because the world is crazy. And that makes sense. For leaders specifically, I mean, I don't know, I got my own opinions, but everyone's different. And I don't pretend that what I do is the way that all people should do it. But I do think there's this sort of the overlap, which is you need to be intentional about what kind of leader you want to be. All right. Do you want to be the alpha, visionary who's out there banging the drum? Do you want to be the one behind the scenes who is empowering people and getting stuff done behind closed doors? Do you want to be the one who can grow people, and like you're just known as a place where if someone comes and works for you, they're just going to get way better really fast? You got to put a stake in the ground, or you got to put pen to paper on what kind of leader you want to be. And then you got to do that for your people. You have to make sure you drag out of them, what do you want? Why do you want it? How is what you're doing going to help you get it? Because most people aren't going to do that on their own. And if you're not setting them up for success, you're not doing your job. And I just think that's something that leaders should take seriously.
Love it. Well said. Adam, we appreciate the time. This has been a lot of fun. Looking forward to seeing you very soon at La Chicha.
Yeah, we're going.
Next time I'm in San Fran.
Yeah, we're going to tell Lorella. We're coming back.
Yes, sir.
Such a pleasure, guys. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, Adam.
See you soon.
Peace.